Welcome to Finding Information for Simple Reports and Project Boards. If you have any questions, if you join us, feel free to join us and then the chat box. You're supposed to say, I'm sorry. Can we start over? Oh, Lord. Okay. Welcome to Finding Information for Simple Reports and Projects. My name is Amy Stoltz, and I am the head of youth services at a larger library in Claremont, Florida. These are questions and things that have come up for my paraprofessional staff, the people that work alongside of me. And so these are often things that come up for them, and I'm hoping it'll be useful for you if you're coming up with these things as well. One of the reasons that we're doing this today is because when elementary and middle school students need to create project boards or write simple papers, they and their parents, they often turn to us at the public library for help. But that experiencing can be very challenging for our paraprofessional staff and very frustrating for patrons because they're usually already a little concerned and frightened about their project. So we're going to learn 3 different categories of things today. First, I'm going to talk about how to understand the homework assignment, how to help them understand their homework assignment. We'll talk a little bit about some ideas for helping research information, and then a lot of time will be spent on how to use library computers to create those papers and project boards at the end. And I just want to have a little reminder, a caveat. I'm not advocating that we do the homework or that we provide tutoring or that we assess or evaluate the homework for them. That is not our job as a librarian. It's a teacher's job or a parent's job. So we're not going to force them to change or correct their homework if we think it's wrong. We just provide guidance. However, it is a library's information, it's our job to help students search for information, determine its relevancy to the project, and to use library resources. That is our job. And so we really want to do the best we can for them on that. The first thing that I want to talk about is translating the homework assignments, helping them understand what their homework assignment actually is. For example, let's say a parent comes in with a 10-year-old student, and the parent is already frustrated, and the child is already tired and grouchy. Mom just got home from work. She walks in the door. She's tired. She has to make dinner, and her child says, I forgot I have a homework assignment due tomorrow. The teacher gave it to me 2 weeks ago. Can we go to the library? So when they get to you, they've already had the fight, they're already upset with each other, and they're already nervous about trying to get this done. And of course, when they come in, it's late, and you're going to close in an hour or 2. So how can you help them as quickly as possible? First of all, my advice is to try to get your hands on the actual homework assignment, what the teacher wrote or handed out. I asked to see it. Do you have it? They may have to run out to their car and find it, or it may be crumpled in the bottom of their book bag. Once in a while, I can find it on the teacher's website, but it really helps. All the time, they get their homework confused. They're not really sure what their assignment is. They misunderstand it, the student does, and sometimes the parents don't really understand what they're seeing either. For example, I've had a 5th grade student come in recently who was looking for a book to read for a book report, and he thought he had to do a book report and he had to find sound words and he had to do all of these things. But when I actually got a hold of the assignment and looked at it, all he really had to do was find an example of poetry with onomatopoeia in it and then write an example of his own, which is not the same thing as a book report, and he didn't have to read an entire book. So I really helped them because they just didn't realize what they needed and saved them a lot of time and doing the wrong project as well. And that was because I asked to see it. So I'm not being intrusive or invasive. I'm helping them. Another issue that'll come up sometimes are potential language barriers. In our community, I have parents that come in who do not speak English as a second language, as a first language, and they also may have trouble reading English as well, and they don't understand the assignment. They can't help their student with it. And if the student is very young, say 1st grade or 2nd grade, the student really can't understand the assignment either. So by looking at it myself, I can help them. And if I need to get a translator, if I have anyone on staff who can help, I don't mind grabbing them and saying, please help me to figure out what this homework problem is. Now let's say that it's a book report or another reading assignment. My first step is going to be to find out if it has to be Accelerated Reader or Lexile. If your schools have a certain list that they use or a certain type of reading levels that they assign, if you know about that, then I would advise asking that first, because that's what we do. We know that a lot of times the kid is not going to choose a book that's outside of the reading range. So let's say that the school has assigned them a 2.5 to a 3.7 AR range. If I waste time looking for books that they might like to read, but that is outside of their range, they're not going to choose it. So that's my first question. Does it have to be AR? Are you taking a quiz at school? Does it have to be Lexile? Do we need to look for that first? I've included some links in case you're not sure, but you can go to arbookfind.com and you can search for Accelerated Reader titles with an advanced search, and you can really narrow it down to help them find exactly what they want. And if they have a list, we have a charter school that has a very long reading list called the Advanced Reader Challenge. So if we have a list, I will memorize the list, or I'll at least go over the list in advance. It's posted on the website. If a kid comes in with the list, I'll grab it and make a photocopy if I have to and look over it. So we know what books are long and what books are short, because they usually want the short books. And I know that the nonfiction books are probably going to be shorter than the novels, and I'll convince them to take maybe one nonfiction, one chapter book, and that saves a lot of time because I'm not looking up things at the end of the night when we're closing that they're not going to choose anyway. So another thing, maybe they have to research information. Maybe they have to do a paper or a project. When they first come in, my question is, what grade level? Sometimes the parent is there without the student. That happens quite a bit with us. So I will say, what grade level is this for? If it's 7th grade, I'm probably going to need different kinds of information than the 2nd grader would need, for example. And a 7th grader is going to need harder information. They're going to need more facts, more details. But if the 7th grader is reading at a low level, then I may have to encourage the parent to help them with it. So just getting that information up front is very useful. My next question are, what sources are allowed? We need to know whether or not they have to have encyclopedias. Do they need to have articles from magazines or newspapers? Maybe they need books. And how many sources do they need? Because a lot of times they'll have already done some website stuff and they just need one book, or they need a book and an encyclopedia. And that will limit, I'm not going to spend all my time searching for something they're not going to use. And finally, are they going to be using the computer? Because if they are, then we need to count for that and how much time we take doing research. So when we're looking for information, there's a couple of things we're going to talk about. Works cited and bibliographies, the catalog, encyclopedias, and the index websites and databases. I'm not going to spend as much time on databases because there's other really good webinars on how to use databases, but I am going to talk a little bit right now about works cited and researching information. First of all, again, ask how many sources do they need? How many of those sources must be books? How many can be encyclopedias? And if they need journal articles. So, for example, if you're looking with middle school or high school students, it's possible that he has to have a reference book. So we go to the reference item and look in the index at the back of the book and find information, and then have him take notes or make photocopies. Or maybe he's going to use something from a book that you could check out, but he's not going to take it because he doesn't have a card. At the point of sale, when you hand an encyclopedia volume to him to take notes on or to write down information on, point out in that article in the encyclopedia or in the book where the title is of the encyclopedia, where the volume number is, where the editors are. Look at the verso on the back of the title page. Show where the copyright date is, the publisher, the place it was published, and then in the actual article to write down the page number, the title of the article, and if there's an author, the author as well, and convince them to go ahead and take that information now, because a lot of times students don't. They don't realize that they have to put all of that information into a bibliography or a works cited, and they will take their notes and go away and then come back needing that information. And if it was from a book that checks out, that book could be gone. Also, with if you're using databases, you can usually copy and paste works cited information from the databases. There are some very fancy apps that we'll talk about. And if they have limited access to computers from home, they may have a hard time using citation apps. So if you're used to using, if you know what citation app is, don't assume they know how to use it. You're going to have to show them how, probably. And also, if they are copying whole paragraphs from the internet because they're running out of time, do remind them that they need to worry about rewriting it in their own words. It's called plagiarism, and they will get in trouble if they get caught. So sometimes they'll just go to a website such as Wikipedia, and they'll copy and paste from the web and then just put it into their article. And if you copy and paste from the web and claim that work as your own, it is plagiarism. If they sit down and they just type it from a book, it's still plagiarism. But if they cite the source, if they say, I got this information from whatever source, Wikipedia or this encyclopedia, and they quote it, they can do it in block quotes or in some other kind of way, but block quotes for a long passage where they just kind of go in. It's not plagiarism. It does count as doing effective research, even though they didn't write it in their own words. So encourage them about that. Let them know that it's true, that they need to do that, but you can't force them. If you're not a school librarian, you don't have any control over it, and I'm not either. I'm a public librarian. For example, I've had a family, they come in all the time, and I built up a relationship with them because I help them with their homework and finding information. And sometimes they're in a rush, and the 7th grade student will be told by the mother to help the 4th grade student get their work done, and she'll just copy and paste from the web. This has happened before, and I pointed out, this is not him writing it in his own words. So this is plagiarism, and he could get in trouble for it if he gets caught. So maybe he should try to type it in his own words. And she was in a rush, and she's like, we don't have time for that. We're just going to do it. And they came back the very next day. He did get caught, and she didn't know why. She still didn't understand. The mother didn't. So I explained again what it was and what the teacher meant when what she had written on the paper, that copying and pasting from Wikipedia does not count. And then they were able to rewrite it. So it's our responsibility to point it out, but we can't force them to do it. But we should point out what it is and just let them know that if they cite it, they'll be okay. So when they talk about citing it, we're talking about bibliographies and works cited. I've seen it both ways from different schools. Some schools call it one thing, some schools call it another. And that's usually what you'll find at the end of their paper, where they've listed all of their sources. The databases, if you live in Florida, the Florida Electronic Library database system that your library would have access to through the library site is very helpful. It's a Gale product. It has lots of great ways to cite, and one of those is EasyBib. If you go online to EasyBib, that is a works cited generator, so you can put in the information and it will kind of write it for you, which is very helpful because it can be difficult to do. And your catalog may have citation helpers. A lot of times, as I've said, people come in, they've done the work, but they didn't write down all the information the teacher requires for the bibliography, and now they need that book again, and it's gone. It's checked out. So I will show them how in our catalog, if you look it up and you click on description, or if you look in the MARC record, you can find everything. You can find usually the publisher and the copyright date and the information that they needed. And if that doesn't work, you can probably find it in Amazon. So they don't have to panic, and we're trying to prevent them from panicking. That's the main thing, helping them out. When I talk about Florida Electronic Library, I'm talking about the database system that the state provides. We access it through our library. You can access it remotely with your library card from home if they have access. So I always ask them about that. And if they do, then I will show them how to access it at my computer and how to do a quick search so that they see what's going on. And if I find something, I'll go ahead and email it to them because you can do that. Now, as far as citation goes, when you click on an article, after you've done a search, when you click on an article, a toolbox will appear on the right, and you'll see the first one is citation tools. If you click on that, you'll get this really handy box. There's an MLA and there's APA. MLA is usually used for English, literature, art, stuff like that. APA, I find, is used a lot for science fair projects in my area, although it may be something else in your area. So here I could literally copy and paste the citation into my bibliography. But over on the right, we have more choices. We have different things like EasyBib is there and RefWorks, and you'll see Save to Google Drive. One of the nice things about the Florida Electronic Library is if your student has a Gmail account, they can go ahead and log in. They can actually send the citation to Google Drive by logging in, and it will save it for them, which is very helpful. And if the teacher's using Google Classroom, that's even more helpful. So when we're helping them with Works Cited, there's other places to find style guides. A lot of the times, the students I have, they do not have any information from the teacher on how to do their bibliography. And sometimes they'll just have a very simple page that says they have to do this or that. So other places to find them, if you have a science fair project, Science Buddies Guide does give you some guidance for this. If they're an AP student in high school, they're probably going to need to do it correctly. The Purdue University, which I have listed there for APA, they also have an MLA style guide. That's very helpful. That can help them out if they're confused. That can help you out if you need to help them figure out what information to write down. Make sure that if you're not sure, if they're not sure what information they need to write down for the Works Cited, to write down everything, to look everywhere, to find it at the end of the article in a database, in the book, like I said, on the verso on the back of the title page, write the page numbers down that you found it, all of that, so that they have it now while they're taking notes rather than after the fact. And when I was a student, I learned this as part of the process, but a lot of my kids that come into the library, they do not know how to do this. I'm going to move on to talking about science fair projects and what we're going to do to help with that. In my location, we also deal with reading fairs, invention fair, Tropicana speeches. There's a lot of stuff going on where they have to do a lot of different projects, and they're all difficult in their own way. But I think science fair is probably the hardest one for my staff to deal with because it's so complicated. For example, on the screen, you'll see the scientific method. We really are only supposed to be helping with background research at the beginning, and maybe if they need to use the computers, how to report those results at the end. And they're supposed to do it in order. So at the beginning of the school year, they would come in for background research. And at the end, towards science fair, they'll come in to report results and get help with that. A lot of my students, though, are not doing them in order. They're doing it out of order. And so they'll have already done their experiment. They're done with it. And they'll show up and they have to get all of their research and do the report now. And it's too late to change it if we can't find something, and that's when they panic. They cannot find the information that they need. They've done a project on something very complicated, such as Mozart plants. Do plants grow better with Mozart? And finding that information is nigh to impossible. Or they did something on a project that everybody else did, lima beans or rust. And in that case, everything's already checked out. Or they expect you to have a book on rust, which if you did, it would probably be gone. So they're in a state and they're desperate, and we're going to help them find things as quickly as possible. First of all, book resources. A lot of times they do need to have a book resource, and I like for them to have one anyway. One thing we can do is help them with keywords. Students usually do not know how to come up with good keywords. So we use Google. I use Google. I'll use Amazon and Google to help students come up with keywords. That's a useful tool for it. So if they're doing something like Rust, I might do Rust Science Fair, and it might come back with something like oxidation somewhere in there, and I'll say, oh, well, maybe that's a good keyword, oxidation. Let's try that, and then we'll use that when we're doing the catalog search. But remember, if your catalog doesn't list the word oxidation or rust or anything else in the description, it's not going to come back with a book. That doesn't mean there's not a book on your shelf. So I will also walk the student over to the Dewey Decimal section where that book would be, and we look and see what's there. Sometimes you'll find a book that's pretty close to the topic, and other times I'll have something more generic, and then I'll pull it off the shelf and I'll show them how to use an index, how to find the different keywords in the index to see if we can find as anything in that book. If they have to have a book, you know, one fact in that book that you can write in your works cited and do something with in your paper counts as the book. You have used a book. So they just need one fact to make their quota for books. Another thing that you can use if you really want to get into this and you're very concerned and you want to plan ahead, I have some web resources, see Palms for you, floridastudents.org for them, but that's to do now. That's not to do when they're desperate. That's to do now as background research for yourself. You also might want to check out your school district's website or your school website and see if they posted the Science Fair project guidelines, because they usually don't know them. They don't have them with them, and then you're going to have to help them write the paper. Well, not write it, but come up with the project board and things like that. Florida does have official guidelines at that website on the bottom, studentsocietyforscience.org. So I recommend that you do that kind of thing now and save yourself headache when you're closing and you're helping other people and you can't dedicate yourself to them, but you know that you need to help them before everything shuts down. I'm going to talk about project boards now. I do help students when they come in with project boards, usually because they don't have access to a computer at home or they don't have access to a printer, and a lot of times also because they're not really sure what they need, but they know that they can get help at the library, so they come to us. So if the student needs to make a project board for science fair, invention fair, any of those fairs, a lot of times they just need images. You can have them do an image Google search. And if you just type in science fair project boards, you'll get lots of examples for them to be inspired by. And that's useful if you don't have a guideline from the school for what it has to look like. This is an example of a very basic project board for science fair. In the middle is where you have lots of the graphs, the tables, the charts, and the photos that they're going to be getting at the library or making at the library. And then on the sides, you have your other information. So when they're making their project board, they're going to have to want to make everything the same. The project title, they're going to want to print it out and it's going to look the same. The hypothesis, the font is going to look the same. So we're going to talk about how to make that go faster as well. But before we do that, these are other websites that have good ideas for project boards. So if you're looking for something to just link to or give to the patron, I recommend those. So let's talk a little bit about making stuff at the library. Every library has different technology available to them. I'm not going to get into hyper-specific things because it might not work at your location, but a lot of the stuff does translate. So something that works in a spreadsheet will probably work in another type of spreadsheet. It kind of translates across, or also you can always go to YouTube for some great information on how to do something very quickly. But before I ever start, when they show up and they need to make this for tomorrow, I estimate the time with them. Does it have to be finished before the library closes? Can you do any of this at home? Do you have access to anything at home? Are you going to cut and paste? Are you allowed to do that? Just literally paste it to the board if you have to. How do you have to really turn this into the teacher? Are you going to turn this in as a paper? Are you going to email it? Are you going to upload it? Do you still have research to do? Because that happens a lot. They haven't actually finished their research. Are you really ready to start? To sit down at the computer and start? I am trying to avoid drama at closing time. One of the things that they like to do is they spend a lot of time creating beautiful fonts and making them purple, and they forget to actually type everything. So because they're unprepared for that end game, when it's time to go and the library is closing, they can't finish. We talk about it at the very outset, like a coach. Another thing we want to talk about before they even get started is how are you turning this in? We have kids that have to do dioramas, regular papers, sometimes they have to make a brochure or a PowerPoint slideshow. If you find out now, that'll help you figure out how much time it's going to take you to help them. Another thing, if they are printing, do you charge for printing? We do. So I'll tell them at the outset how much it costs, and a lot of times the parent needs to run out to the car and get change, or I'll talk to the parent about making sure that they have some extra money for them, and they may have to even go to an ATM if they're really desperate and they have a lot of printing to do. It's better to handle that now than at closing time, so I do that right from the outset. And also, because printing causes so much of the stress and drama, I keep reminding them that when we're about to close. I also talk to them about how they're going to save their work. Did they bring a flash drive, a USB drive? Probably not, so I help them there if they didn't. One of the things that I find kids sometimes think they can save a file to the desktop and it'll be on another computer later, the next day, or it can just translate from computer to computer, because at school it can work that way, but it doesn't work that way at our library. We have deep freeze and things like that, and it's not going to be there the next day. So I talked to them at the beginning about saving that assignment, and I set it up. So let's say that I loan them a flash drive. We're going to plug it in, and we're going to go ahead and file. I'll show them save as, how to find that flash drive, and title it and save it to there, so that, and I remind them, don't forget to save. Don't forget to save, just when I'm walking by helping other people, so that they lose as little as possible if the power goes off, or lightning flashes, or the computer shuts down automatically at the end of the night. If they're going to upload a file to a website, or they're going to email that file, one of the things that they have trouble with is doing that because they're trying to do it. Let's say that they've got it there, they think they can file and send, and it's going to work, but it's not, because it's a public computer and they don't understand that. So from the outset, if they're just going to be emailing it or they're going to be uploading it, I have them save it to the desktop so they can find it later, and then go ahead and open up that website or that email so that they're ready to go and to attach it. Sometimes they can't remember how to get into their email because it's on their device. They don't know their password or anything else. If they're really desperate, I will jump on there and I'll quickly email it to myself, and then I'll email it to them so they can forward it to their teacher if they need to do that. Another thing, if they're using Google or Dropbox, they're used to using the apps usually, and so they think they can drag and drop and do things that they cannot do. They're going to have to log in remotely with the browser, and again, they'll need to know their password. So find all of that out now before it's the end of the night, and then help them strategize how they're going to do this. So if they're looking for images, one of the problems that we have is that every time they use the computer, either we have something different going on for some reason, or they have a different version at home or a different version at school, and it's confusing. So we have a system now that we do, and it seems to work pretty well. Let's say they do a Google image search. They'll click on images, and they'll see the picture, and they'll click on that picture, actually click on it, and you'll get a black box, and then on the side, you'll have some options, and one of them is View Image. So if I have them click on View Image, and it opens up in a better format, usually bigger, a little bit more clear, and then I'll have them right-click and copy that, and then I'll have them open up Publisher or whatever document they're using and paste it into there. And when they do their printing, they're going to be able to control the size, which is important, and they'll be able to control where it is, and also save money by having multiple pictures on one page if they're doing that, where they're just cutting it out with scissors. They can also print the screen if they're getting super desperate. Technically, you can do screen capture. Some of the newer versions of Publisher will have that. If you go to Insert, you'll see screen capture. On your keyboard, there's a button, might be a button that says print screen that you can also use. So if an image isn't lending itself to copying, you can do that. Sometimes copyright issues may come up, and it is our job to remember that. But if they're using one image for homework, fair use does apply. I do recommend that they get the URL address and copy and paste it somewhere just so that they have cited it, although I find that our teachers don't usually worry about it too much. Now, when I like to use Publisher for printing images for them, I find it much easier to use than Word or PowerPoint, because PowerPoint slows down our printer. So I will have them bring up Publisher, copy and paste into there. One of the biggest problems my students, when they come in, they have is resizing the picture. They always want to drag it from the middle and from the top and from the side, where it looks like a square. They're going to try to resize it that way, and I tell them, don't do it that way. It looks like a funhouse mirror. It distorts it. To only do it from the corners where it looks like a circle, and I'll show them how to do that so that they can keep the perspective correct, because they don't know that a lot of the time. So some more tips and tricks for using the computers. I will also have them duplicate slides or duplicate the pages in Publisher after formatting. And we'll use Format Painter and inserting graphs and charts. So the next few sets of things we're going to talk about covers all of that. First of all, let's talk about graphs and charts, because those are really hard. When they're doing science fair especially, they're required to have a graph or a chart. And that can be really difficult for them to do, just to do it on the computer, but also hard for them to understand. So I've learned over the years, the first thing I do is hand them a piece of paper and a pencil and tell them to sketch it. Sketch it out. What do they think that this graph is going to look like? What is it supposed to have in there? What numbers are you using? Sometimes they don't realize that they actually do need numbers for their graph. So I'll say, well, what did you do? Did you grow lima beans? Did you measure them? Those measurements are your numbers. And they're like, oh, okay. And so we talk about how to sketch it out. 5 minutes will save 50 minutes on a computer. There are some websites, there are different ones. One of them that I'm putting here is nces.ed.gov. They have a create a graph, and it's useful. If you know and are extremely comfortable in Excel, Excel works very well for making charts and graphs. But if you are not comfortable in Excel, the minute that you're trying to help a student is not the time to learn. So I would recommend doing the graphs instead. You can use Google Spreadsheets. It's kind of similar to Excel, it's just not as robust. If it's only a chart or a table, you can also make it a table, the table in MS Word, and it's much easier than trying to use graphs. But that only works if it's a table. This is an example of a pie chart that I made with the NCES Graphs website, and it took some tweaking. I had to put in a lot of different information and play with it before I got a picture that I liked. So remember, this site does require Flash, so if you don't have Flash on the computers, it might not work. The first thing when you go in there, you're going to see that in order to enter the data, you have to know the data that you're entering, some facts and figures. So let's say that they were growing lima bean plants, one in full sun, one in the shade, one in the dark, and they measured for growth for each plant daily for 1 week. That's their data. So if you look at your action, if you go in there and you play with it, you'll see you have to design. So I'll say, okay, choose your style, what works best on your sketch. If they've sketched it, you already know what you're doing. Data, we've already talked about the numbers, what they mean, that's where you put those numbers. Labels, that's to explain the numbers that you're putting. And then when you click preview, you can see what it looks like. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it messed up? You can go back and fix it. And then at the end, you can print or save. Now, you can save it as a downloadable JPEG, which you can then insert into your document to make your PowerPoint or you make your project board. This is another example. This is a graph, a line graph that was made with the same website. And again, if you look at the handouts, you'll see I have some information about what data is and what the x-axis is to help you play with it if you want to try to recreate it. We also can use Google Spreadsheets. It's similar to Excel, but it's not as easy to use. Now, if they have a Gmail account, this is the way you might want to go. You just have them enter the data into a spreadsheet. So column A, I have the full sun, the shade, and the darkness. And then along the line, we have days of the week, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we have the measurements in centimeters that it might have been. And then over on the right, after you select the data with your cursor, with your mouse, you're going to insert the chart, and you will end up with a chart that looks like this. Now, it did require tweaking. It's not as easy to use as Excel if you're good at Excel. But if you're not good at Excel or you're not comfortable, this is a good way to go also. And if you're having trouble with labels, don't waste your time trying to fix the labels. Just copy and paste this into your document and then create a text box with the labels you want and stick it in there. It'll do the same thing. They'll never know the difference, and it will be faster. Now, sometimes my students have to make brochures in Publisher, or they have to make, with the project boards, they have the titles that they want to have look exactly the same every single time. So to save time, I will talk about the project board. Let's size it out. Let's see what it looks like. And then we'll get into Publisher, and we'll show them different ways that they can do the different things. Now, let's start with brochures. We're going to, first of all, you're going to, sorry, I'm not going to start with brochures. Let's start with project boards. Okay, so choose a blank template, an 8.5 by 11 landscape, and that's what I usually go with for them. You can do portrait, it doesn't matter. And then have them insert a text box and type a heading, say hypothesis in the text box. Then go ahead and format that text. The font, the format size, if it's bold, the color, center it, everything they have to do. Make it perfect. Make it big enough. Make it do what they want it to do. And then after that, what you're simply going to do is duplicate it. So on Publisher, on the left where it says page navigation, this is an example where I've created a sign that they might put on their project board. And the orange tab, Drawing Tools, it allows me to add the red border, other changes I might want to make. And then I'm going to duplicate the page. So you're going to go over to the left page navigation and right-click on the small image of the page on the left navigation bar. And then you can duplicate the page. So you choose Insert Duplicate Page, and now you have the same thing. Now I have 2 pages. So then I'm going to click and make sure that number 2 is selected on the left, and then I can change the words. So now I have another sign that says graphs, and it looks exactly the same. So everything is the same, and rather than format each text box separately every time, I just duplicate and change the text. It saves a great deal of time. It also helps them to have a theme. Now we're going to talk about brochures. So some of my middle school students, they have to create a brochure, such as a travel brochure for a state or country report. And I have them use Publisher. They can use an installed trifold brochure template. If you don't have that, they can use a blank template and add a built-in ruler guide. For example, this is a built-in template in Publisher, for Arrow is the name of it. And you can see on the left, you have page number 1 is the back, page number 2 is the inside. In the middle, in the center panel, that's the back of the brochure. On the right, that's the front of the brochure. And that can really help a student understand what they're doing. They can see it in their mind better because it's already done for them. If you don't have access to that, you can also use guides, which is found in Publisher under Page Design. It's not as simple or easy to do because you also have to help them figure out what's front and what's back. But it will work. So the reason I wanted to do this is because we get so many students in that are so grateful. Their families are so grateful when we help them. And they tell their friends that they got help at the library, and they tell their teachers, and more people come. They come to check out books. They come to use our resources. They come to ask us for help. And the more help that we give, the more people come. We have a very happy population. They love our library. We get a lot of use. They have so much support for us, for our summers, for our reading programs, for our adult programs, and that's what we want. We want them to support us, to love us, to vote for us, and by providing this kind of help, they'll want to do that. And if you say that you're not getting these kinds of questions, if you provide the help to one kid and he tells, you'll get more people coming in. It works for us, and I know it will work for you. So if there are any questions, now's the time. I wish everybody good luck. If you need to contact me, if you have more detailed questions you want to ask, I don't mind at all. Feel free to call me or to email me, and I'll be happy to help in any way that I can. Thank you.